Well, welcome everyone as we broadcast once again from our flagship station here at Agudas Yisrael of Fairways Lakewood. It's interesting. I was driving from the Catskills. It's a long drive, so I said, you know what? Let me listen to myself from last year for tomorrow's daf. So I listen, and it starts, "Good morning, everyone." It's not often that you hear a shir from a 60-year-old on the morning of his chuppah. So tomorrow's daf is 7.5 years from when I got married, the morning of the chuppah. Thank you. Okay, we...
Mazel tov again.
Yeah, thank you. Shelly, you were at the wedding. Yeah, so was...
I was, of course.
So was Ruvain, so was Irving. So was, I think Mel was there.
Yes, we stopped by. Robertson and I.
So anyway, we are holding on Daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. We are holding by Ve'ema, 7 lines from the top of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. 7 lines from the top of Daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Remember, we were talking about these copepods, the larvae, and we said that there are different categories. In Yamim and Necholim, in sea and rivers, it needs to have scales and fins. In Charitz and Eitzim, which are also ponds and canals that have an underground source, it also has to have fins and scales. But Mayim and Kalim, in utensils, and in Boris Shichin and Ma'aris, which is still water without a bubbling underground source, if it's larva, if it's copepods, you could eat it. So the Gemara says, but Ve'ema, the Gemara is not satisfied. The Gemara says, Ve'ema ma prat mafurish ma'im gedelin ala karka, that any water that sits on the land, af kol ma'im gedelin ala gabe karka, any water that sits on the ground, even in Boris Shichin Amaris, even still water, should still, Umay Rabbi, and what would it include? Afilu Boris Shichin Amaris L'Yisura. That there also you need to have, if it's in pits, trenches, and caves, even though it's still water, there also you need to have fins and scales. Or my miyat, and the only thing that the klal product klal will exclude is miyat kalim. Says the Gemara, im kain, if that's the case, then when the pasuk says, if you remember, we said that it says that that these toichlu mayahanilei. Why would you need toichlu? It would be enough just to say a klal uprat and ein b'chlal ela mashi b'frat, and it would include anything like yamim u'necholim, even that which is on the ground. Why do you need the last klal of toichlu? So therefore, it must come to include even Boris Shichin Umaris. Says the Gemara, the Bei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, the Bei Rabbi Yishmael, you know, if throughout Shas, there are 2 means of derivation. The klal product, klal, generalization, specification, generalization. And then there's the more inclusive riba miot riba. An amplification, a limitation, and an amplification. So the Rabbi Yishmael, in the Academy of Rabbi Yishmael, they said, b'mayim shtei pa'amim, the 2 times mayim, ein ze klal prat, ela riba umiyat. B'mayim riba, mayim includes b'yamim u'b'necholim, b'mayim riba, b'yamim u'necholim miyat, and then b'mayim, the second mayim, chaz of riba. It is the second amplification. Riba miyat v'riba, riba kol. My Rabbi, what does it include? It includes charitzin unitzin l'isura. That even the ponds and the canals that are a bubbling source are usher unless you have fins and scales. My miyat by rishichan amaris latera. Says the Gemara, "Ema my riba barashichan amaris liisura." Maybe it includes barashichan amaris, and the only thing it excludes is in your vessels. My miyat kalim. Says the Gemara. Then again, it would be enough just with a riba and a miyat, and you don't need the second riba. Im kain toichlu ma'ahanile. Says the Gemara, but ve'epach ana. Why don't we switch it around? And why don't we say that the ni'itzim and the charitzim are permitted, and the Bayrashichan and Ma'aris are forbidden? Maybe we should switch it around. So says the Gemara, no. Says the Gemara, Keditani Matisya, the Tani Matisya by Yehuda. My rois l'rabbis b'rishichan u'ma'aris l'teira. Why did we decide to include pits, trenches, and caves that there the larva is permitted u'lahoitzi charitzin u'itzin l'isura, and the canals and the ponds are usher? Mar bani b'rishichan u'ma'aris she'en atzurim kekelim, because they're stationary, stagnant water like vessels. They're not stationary like my vessels. Now we said that one pasuk outright indicates that what's in vessels doesn't need to have scales and fins, and one says it indirectly. So the Gemara says we just threw that out. We didn't elaborate on it. Now we're going to elaborate on it. Hey sasam v'hei mefurish, which is clear, which is vague, and which is clear. Pliga b'ravacha v'ravina. Chad amar yesh lai, the positive commandment. Ezeh toichlu kalasher yesh lai snapper v'kaskesses bayamim u'menachalim, which implies only by Yamim and Nechalim do you need to have snapper and kaskesses. But that which is not in the rivers and seas, you could do it even without. The Einlai, the one that says if it doesn't have fins and scales in the seas and the rivers, you can't eat it. That's more vague, which implies you can't eat it only if it's in rivers and seas. But if it's not in rivers and seas, even if it doesn't have it, you could eat it. The Chadam are the other way around. Ein lai mefarish. The one that says if it doesn't have it, fins and scales, you can't eat it in rivers and seas. That's the one that teaches us where do we say that it's detrimental only in rivers and seas. The Yeshlai, the more positive one, that's sasam, that's vague. Now, the Gemara explains each one. My time in the mandam Yeshlai meforish, that which it says as zet toichlu, you could eat it if it has fins and scales in the rivers and seas. Amalach minahu dekamishur kalim. From that, it's clear that utensils are permitted because it says. And from there, as kol asher b'seich hamayim, you could eat. When can't you eat it? B'yamim v'nechalim, it has to have fins and scales. My time in the mandama ain't like mefarish. So this is a svara that we said yesterday. I might think that maybe it's the other way around. If it's in seas and rivers, if it has fins and scales, you could eat it. If it's in kalim, maybe you can't eat it even if it doesn't have fins and scales. Because the latter pasuk that says you can't eat it if it doesn't have fins and scales in seas and rivers, that's the only time you can't eat it. The imahayk, because if it's from the positive pasuk, havamina bekalim, I might say you could eat it if it has fins and scales in rivers and seas, but in kalim you can't even eat it even if it doesn't have fins and scales. By kalim afagav the islay, even if it has fins and scales, maybe nami lo yiseichel, maybe even then you can't eat it. So the first one would not be conclusive. Now, beer was made from dates. Dates would have worms or larvae. So what they would do is they would pour the dates, they would pour the beer over wood so that if there's worms, it would get caught in the wood. Amar Rav Huna loylishvei inish shikra b'tzivyasa be'urta. Don't sift your beer onto wood in the night. Dilma parish le'el mitzivyasa. Maybe the worm will be sifted out of the beer onto the wood, and in the dark, v'hader nafal lekasa, and then fall back into the cup. And once it's out of the cup, so then it's sheretz ha-sheretz ala aretz, and then Ravi over mishum sheretz ha-sheretz ala aretz. Says the Gemara, well, why aren't you worried then if it's in the vessel too, and it never left the vessel? Why aren't you worried maybe it'll creep onto the wall of the vessel, and then fall back into the beer? Ihaki b'mana nami dilma parish l'dafnan demanda v'hadar nafal l'mana. Says the Gemara, if it never went out of the keli, it's not a sheretz ha-sheretz al arts. Hasam hainu revise. The whole keli is its place of origination, and therefore, if it never left the keli, it's not us. Says the Gemara, Uminas Simra. Where do we know that there's a difference, the inside of the keli, that's still considered its place of origination? The Tanya, how do we know to include that the pits, trenches, and caves, that you could bend down and drink from them, you have to refrain. But why? Why don't you worry about that the bug might have crept up to the wall of the pit and fell back in? Maybe it climbed up on the wall and then fell. Elahainu Ravise, that's its place of origination. Hachanami over here also in the beer mug, Hainu Ravise. Amalei Rav Chisda Rav Huna, Tanya de Messiah. We have a brisa that adduces proof to you. It says, Kol ha-sheretz ha-sheretz ala aretz. L'rabbis, that includes yafchushin shesininin, that if you have gnats that you strained out of wine, so now they're on the ground, Taima de synonym, it's only because you strained them out of the wine. Haloi synonym, but if they weren't strained out and they remained in the flask, in the vat, shari. Omer Shmuel. Kishus sheslia bi'ibeha. This we learned already. This is an interesting din. a cucumber that became wormy while attached to the ground. So we said once it's attached to the ground, even if it's inside the cucumber, it's considered a sheretz hasheretz al haaretz because it's attached to the ground. Asura mishum hasheretz hasheretz al haaretz. So the Gemara says, "Leima Messiah lay." Let's adduce a proof to that. Not everybody holds like Shmuel. Shmuel holds that even if it originates in the cucumber, but if the cucumber is attached to the ground, it's asur, because it's considered to be sheretz hasheretz al haaretz because it's attached to the ground. So Leima Messiah lay, the Tani Chada, in one brayse it says, the pasuk says ala haaretz, lahaitzi, this excludes zizin sheba'adashim, gnats that are in lentils, v'esayatushim shebaklisim, and gnats that are in a type of pea, chickpeas, v'esalah shebetmarim v'shebegregoris, and the worms that are in dates and figs, because these were detached from the ground, and therefore they never left their place of origination. They're not sheretz hasheretz al haaretz, so they're permitted. V'tani ida kol hasheretz hasheretz al haaretz l'rabbis, to include tolah shebe'ikrei zeisim, in the roots of olives, v'shebe'ikrei gefanim, and in the roots of vines, of grapes. So why is one asur and one mutter? My love, Aidi v'Aidi b'peira, both are talking about in the fruit. V'abi be'ah, if it's attached to the ground, so like Shmuel says, that's sheretz hasheretz al haaretz, and it's forbidden. The first case where it says it's permitted in the chickpeas and in the lentils, that's talking about shaloi be'ah, when it wasn't attached to the ground. So the Gemara says, no, it's not necessarily a proof to Shmuel. Both could be talking about where it's attached to the ground, and yet if it never left the fruit, it would be permitted. The second brisa, it's forbidden if the insects were on the tree. On the roots of the olive, and on the roots of the vine. But maybe in the fruit itself, even when it's attached to the ground, it's not yet called sheretz hasheretz al haaretz. The ma'aseh is we hold like Shmuel, that if it's in the ground, that's why we have a big problem with insects inside a date, because if it was formed while it was in the ground, it is forbidden. So now the Gemara clears some interesting shaylos. You say that once it comes out, it's forbidden. What happens if it dies as soon as it emerged? It didn't crawl outside. It came out and it died. What about if only part of it came out? Is it forbidden only if the entire thing came out? What if it came out but it never walked on the ground? Says the Gemara, take Tishbi Atatz Kushas V'Bais. We're going to have to leave these questions for Mashiach. Another series of questions. What if it only went on the roof of the date, it didn't go on the ground? What if it came out of the pit? It grew in the pit and came out of the roof onto the roof of the pit, but it was still inside the date. What if it tunneled its way from one date to another date? It never came out, but it wasn't in its place of origination. It tunneled from one date to the other. Says the Gemara again, Teiku. These are going to be interesting questions for Mashiach.
How would you ever know?
Huh? You saw the hole.
How would you ever know that it tunneled from one to another?
You saw the hole. Now, we want to welcome in Dr. Guy and Baruch Ian, Leiby Vego, Chaim Kramer, Dr. Block, Saba, Marshall Castle, Mel Zachter, Harvey, Shalom Fogel, Mark Schafel, Yaakov Warman, Michal, Menachem Yemansky, Ruben Pollack, Rebel Yafi, Shelley Zeitlin, Nachman Chapler, Irving Fishbaum, Eddie Kazan, Stephen Holtzman, Moshe Lehman, Yitzi Muller, Ilya Shutman, Shimon Klein, Gabriel Epstein, Abe Barbach, Danny Vogel, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, and David Helfgott. And here in the shul we have Ruvain Shanit and Iran and Michal Avram and Berish. So now, and by the way, remember, as Irving is fond to remind us, tomorrow night, if you're using the art scroll, you need volume 3. You'll need volume 3. And by the way, very soon, we're going to need volume 2 in the Mishnah Yomis. Masechtas Kalim, in the Mishnah Elucidated, has 2 volumes. Also in the other Mishnayos, in the black Mishnayos, it says 2 volumes. So we're going to need the second volume already. What a hard Mishnah Yomis. Really, really hard. I don't know about you, Rabbi Yisai, but I found the Elu Trefus to be very enjoyable. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen.
Okay, now we're going to talk about tapeworms. Type of tapeworm. Bari Rav Ashi. Bari Rav Sheshes Berei Ravidi. Kukiyani Asire. Tapeworms that are in the liver and the lung of the animal, they're forbidden. Because we say that they didn't originate inside, they came from the outside. My timer may alma us. So Rav Ashi says if they came from outside, they should be found in the digestive tract. It should be found in the digestive tract, not in the lungs and the liver. Tapeworms are permitted. My time, it had to have germinated from the animal itself. Rav Ashi Pshita. If it came from outside, however, that's not the halacha. The tapeworm is also my timer because meyim noyim, the animal when it was sleeping, the tapeworm came up the animal's nostrils, and that's how it's found in the lungs and the liver. No. Toiloim, worms. Darnei de bisra asire. That which is found in the meat is aser. De kavre, that which is found in fish, shaya. Amalei Ravina le'ime, Ravina said to his mother, the small larva that is in fish, avla li vana echel. Just mix it up so I don't see it and I'll eat it. It looks disgusting. And to eat something that looks disgusting is an aveira of Baal Teshakt. But if you mix it up and I don't see it, I could eat it. Says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Mishash, Rav Achel, Ravina, Maishna, Ma'odisanya, Nivlosam Tishaketsu, and the carcass you should find disgusting. L'Rabba, he says, Hadronim Shebabehema, the larva in the animal. So he says it's interesting. The animal needs shchita to be materit. The larva that's in the animal, the shchita doesn't permit it. It doesn't work for the larva. So therefore it remains forbidden. Behema b'shkitu d'mishtarya. V'hani, and the larva, midoloi kamahanilu shkita, since the shkita doesn't help, b'isurayu kaimon. They remain with their iser. Aval dog and fish doesn't need a heter. Ba'asifa ba'alma mishtri. It's like we said, it's permitted when you gather it in. V'hani, The only problem is it's disgusting. If you mix them and you don't see them, it's permitted. Tanrabanan. Holech al gachain, that which slithers on its belly is forbidden. Zenachash, that's a snake. Kol, l'rabbi says hashilshul v'esadayim l'shilshul, worms and that which is similar to worms. Al arba, upon 4, ze'akub, that's a scorpion. Kol hoylech al arba, l'rabbi says achiposhes, to include a beetle, v'esadayim l'chiposhes, so things that are similar to a beetle. Marba reglaim, many feet all around it. Zenadal, that's a centipede. Kol, l'rabbi says adayma v'esadayma l'dayma. Other creatures that have feet all around it, and those that have feet on the majority. To end the perek in the Tordic way, we talk about the legendary fish that the tzaddikim will eat on La'asid Lavai, the Levyasan, right? We say that we should be zaycha to eat from the Levyasan. Marshall is going to be looking for Romanian Levyasan, and he's not going to find it. But it's interesting how you're going to see him wandering around there in Eilam Haba, asking people, anybody have any Romanian? Tanya. Rabbi Yossi ben Damascus Aimer Livyasan Dog Taru. The Livyasan is a kosher fish. Shenemar Gaiva, its pride is Afike Maginim, is the power of its shields. That's the kaskesses, that's the scales. Tachtav, and beneath it, Chadude Choros. It has like sharp pieces of shards of earthenware. Apike Maginim, its mighty shields, Elu Kaskasim, those are the scales. Elu Kaskasim Shabai. Tachtov Chadude Chores, beneath it are like sharp shards. Elu Sanpirim, those are the fin Shepareach Bam. So you see that Levyasan has snapper v'kaskeses, and it's a kosher fish. Hadron Aloch Elu Treifus. Hadron Aloch Elu Treifus. Hadron Aloch Elu Treifus. Tomorrow, Yitz Hashem, we'll start the 4th perek, B'meima Makasha. Tomorrow, I will be broadcasting again from over here in Lakewood. I think by accident last night I said Staten Island, in Lakewood. And I did the Mishnah Yomis already earlier between Mincha and Ma'ariv.